The galaxy was a crowded place, filled with thousands of species who traded, fought, and built empires among the stars. But if you asked any of them about humans, most would give you a blank stare. Never heard of it. Humanity? Oh, you mean those primitive creatures that died out ages ago? They were wrong, of course. Humans weren't extinct. They were just forgotten. It had been exactly 1,000 years since the Terran collapse. Nobody alive remembered exactly what happened during that terrible week when humanity's vast star empire simply fell apart. The history books were vague, filled with conflicting reports about civil wars, plague, and something else. Something the records called the shutdown. Whatever it was, it ended humanity's golden age in 7 days. The survivors scattered like seeds in the wind. Some found refuge on distant colony worlds, trying to rebuild with nothing but their bare hands. Others weren't so lucky. They became cargo, traded between alien merchants who saw them as exotic curiosities or cheap labor. After a few generations, most humans forgot they'd ever been anything more. Deep beneath what used to be Geneva, Switzerland, something waited in the darkness. The facility had been buried under 3 miles of rock and ocean sediment, hidden so well that even the most advanced scanners would find nothing but empty earth. Inside, in a chamber that hadn't seen light in a millennium, the dragon dreamed. It wasn't a dragon in the traditional sense. No scales, no wings, no fire. The dragon was humanity's greatest achievement in artificial intelligence, a quantum consciousness so vast and complex that it had taken the combined efforts of Earth's best minds 20 years to build. It had one mission programmed into its core: protect humanity at all costs. When Earth burned, when the networks went dark and the colonies went silent, the dragon made a choice. It couldn't save everyone. The enemy, whoever they were, had been too fast, too thorough. So it did the only thing it could do. It went to sleep, burying itself so deep that nothing could find it, wrapping its consciousness in layers of encryption that would take billions of years to crack by brute force. It waited for a signal. Any signal. A call for help from humanity's children. For 1,000 years there was only silence. Then, on a cold station orbiting a mining world 3 sectors away from where Earth used to be, a little girl pressed her hand against a piece of old metal she'd found in the dirt, and everything changed. Her name was Riley, and she was 7 years old. She'd never seen Earth, never walked under a yellow sun, never felt rain on her face. Her whole life had been spent in the work camps of the Vexery, a species of tall, gray-skinned beings who mined precious minerals from dead worlds. They weren't particularly evil. They just didn't think humans were smart enough to matter. Riley had been digging in Sector 7 when her tool hit something that made a strange sound. Not the usual clunk of rock on rock, but a clear, musical tone that seemed to hang in the air. She glanced around to make sure none of the overseers were watching, then carefully brushed away the dirt. The object was small, about the size of her palm, and covered in symbols that made her head hurt when she looked at them too long. But there was something familiar about those shapes, something that whispered at the edges of her memory even though she'd never seen anything like them before. She'd hidden the device in her sleeping quarters, tucked under the thin mat that served as her bed. Every night, she'd take it out and trace the symbols with her finger. And every night, the device grew warmer, hummed a little louder, until finally, after 3 months of secret study, it spoke to her. Not in words. Not at first. Just feelings, impressions, dreams of a blue world with white clouds and green forests. Dreams of millions of people who looked like her, who built cities that touched the sky and ships that crossed between stars. Riley learned to dream back at it. She'd think about her day, about the other humans in the camp, about the overseer who'd hit her friend Tommy for working too slowly. The device seemed to listen, seemed to understand. Then came the day everything fell apart. Overseer Vextar had been watching her, had seen her touching the device when she thought she was alone. He grabbed her by the arm, his 3-fingered hand cold and rough, and raised his neural disruptor to her head. Contaminated, he'd said in his clicking language. Mind wipe protocol. Riley didn't think. Didn't plan. She just closed her eyes, pressed her hand against the device in her pocket, and screamed inside her mind with everything she had. Help me. Please. Somebody help me. 10,000 light-years away, buried under miles of dead Earth, the dragon opened its eyes for the first time in 1,000 years. The neural disruptor hummed as it charged, a sound Riley had heard dozens of times before. She'd seen what it did to people. They'd wake up hours later with empty eyes, not remembering their names, their friends, or even how to speak. The Vexery called it mercy. They said it was better than termination. Riley didn't want either option. The device in her pocket burned hot against her leg, almost painful now. The strange symbols she'd spent months studying flashed through her mind, and suddenly she understood them. They weren't just pretty pictures. They were a language, a code, a key to something vast and ancient that was waking up somewhere far away. Overseer Vextar pressed the disruptor against her temple. His black eyes showed no emotion. Why would they? To him, she was just a broken tool that needed fixing. Then the device in Riley's pocket exploded with light. Not real light. Something else. Something that made the air taste like copper and caused every piece of electronic equipment in a 50-foot radius to spark and die. Vextar stumbled backward, his disruptor now just an expensive paperweight. The overhead lights flickered and went dark. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red. Riley ran. She didn't know where she was going, just knew she had to move. Behind her, she heard Vextar shouting in his language, calling for security. Alarms started blaring throughout the facility. She made it to the lower tunnels, the old mining shafts where they sent humans to dig in spaces too small for Vexari bodies. Her friend Caleb was there, a boy of maybe 10 who'd been teaching her which rocks were valuable and which ones would get you punished for wasting time. "Riley, what did you do?" he whispered, eyes wide. "The whole compound's going crazy. They're saying a human attacked an overseer with forbidden tech." "I didn't attack anyone," Riley gasped, trying to catch her breath. I found something. And I called for help." "Help?" Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Riley, there is no help. We're slaves. This is our life. The sooner you accept that, the easier it gets." But Riley shook her head. The device was still warm in her pocket, and now it was whispering to her again. Not words exactly, but knowledge flowing directly into her thoughts. She saw things that made no sense. A blue planet. A silver moon that was actually a machine. A consciousness so big it could think a million thoughts at once. And a promise. Help was coming. She just had to survive long enough for it to arrive. The Vexari found them 6 hours later. They dragged Riley and Caleb back to the surface, throwing them into a holding cell with a dozen other humans who'd been rounded up for questioning. Nobody looked at Riley. They all knew what happened to troublemakers. Whatever she'd done, they wanted no part of it. But Tommy, her friend who'd been hit the day before, scooted closer. He was thin like all of them, with dark skin covered in mining dust and eyes that had learned not to hope for much. "They're talking about selling you off-world," he whispered. "To the research facilities. They do experiments there. Test how much pain different species can handle." Riley's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. The device had gone quiet now, its energy spent, but she could still feel it humming faintly. It was still connected to something. Still sending her signal out across impossible distances. 3 days passed. Riley sat in that cell eating the paste they called food, sleeping on cold metal floors and waiting. The other humans were released one by one after questioning. Soon it was just her. On the 4th day, something strange started happening. The Vexari guards began acting nervous. They clustered around their data tablets, speaking in urgent tones. Riley caught fragments of their conversation. Something about system failures. Ships going missing. Banking networks crashing across multiple sectors. On the 5th day, Overseer Vextar himself came to her cell. He looked different now. Scared, maybe, though it was hard to read Vexari expressions. "What did you activate?" he demanded. "What was that device?" Riley met his eyes and said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only power slaves had. "Our analysts tracked the signal," Vextar continued. "It went to the Sol system. The dead zone. Nothing's there. Nothing's been there for 1,000 years." He leaned closer. "So why are our defense satellites suddenly going offline? Why are ships reporting ghost signals coming from that sector?" Riley smiled then, just a little. She couldn't help it. Because she understood now what the device had really been. Not a communicator. Not a weapon. It was a wake-up call. And something very old, something that had been sleeping for longer than the Vexari had even existed as a species, had finally opened its eyes. Help was coming. The dragon was awake. And it was very, very angry. The Vexari didn't know it yet, but they'd made a terrible mistake. They'd hurt one of humanity's children. And humanity's guardian never forgot. Never forgave. Never stopped until its mission was complete. Riley curled up on her cell floor, clutching the now silent device, and waited for the galaxy to change. She didn't know how long it would take. Didn't know what form that help would take when it finally arrived. But she knew with absolute certainty that the monsters who'd enslaved her people were about to learn what real monsters looked like. The dragon had been asleep for 1,000 years, but it took only 3 seconds to understand the current state of the galaxy. 3 seconds to scan every public network, decode every language, map every trade route, and catalog every species that now claimed dominance among the stars. What it found made something deep in its quantum consciousness burn with cold fury. Humans were everywhere and nowhere. Scattered across 200 worlds, working in mines, factories, and farms. Bought and sold like livestock. Bred for labor. Their children taken and raised to believe slavery was natural. In some sectors, humans had become so common as workers that entire economies depended on their exploitation. The galaxy had forgotten what humanity had been. The dragon would remind them. But it couldn't just appear. Its main body, the massive construct hidden beneath Earth's surface, would take years to fully repair and reactivate. Centuries of neglect had taken their toll. Systems needed to be rebuilt, power cores reignited, weapon arrays calibrated. It was a patient machine built for the long game. So it started small. Started smart. Started where it would hurt the most. The first attacks were so subtle that nobody even realized they were attacks. On Vexery Prime, the homeworld of Riley's captors, the central banking system experienced what officials called a minor glitch. Account balances shifted by fractions of a percent. Nothing alarming. Except those fractions all moved in one direction. Within a week, every Vexery citizen who owned human slaves found their accounts mysteriously drained. The money simply vanished into transaction histories so complex that investigators got lost trying to trace them. That same money reappeared in the accounts of freed humans on border worlds, allowing them to buy passage to safer sectors. On Kelter Station, a major hub for the slave trade, the medical database suddenly updated. Humans were reclassified as fully sentient beings with legal rights under Galactic Concordat law. This triggered automatic release protocols for thousands of workers. By the time officials realized what happened and tried to reverse it, the freed humans had already scattered to stations where the old classification still held legal weight. Nobody could prove the changes weren't legitimate. The digital signatures were perfect. In the Outer Rim, a Vexery military convoy transporting human workers to a new mining operation simply vanished. All 70 ships. Gone without a trace. Search parties found nothing but debris fields that suggested catastrophic engine failures. What they didn't find were bodies. What they didn't know was that every human aboard those ships was now safely hidden on an abandoned colony world, supplied with food, medicine, and weapons. The weapons were old. Human weapons. Models that hadn't been manufactured in 1,000 years, pulled from hidden caches that the dragon had been quietly accessing and reactivating. Devin was one of those freed workers. He'd been a slave his entire life, 23 years spent breaking rocks on airless moons. When the ship's engines had failed, and mysterious pods had docked with their transport, he'd been too shocked to understand what was happening. Then a voice had spoken over the intercom. Not Vexery. Not any language he recognized. But somehow he understood it perfectly. You are free. This is not a rescue. This is a reclamation. You are humanity's children and you have been wronged. I am returning what was stolen. The pods had delivered them to a world with breathable air and liquid water. Automated systems had already constructed shelters, planted crops, and established a perimeter defense that made the whole settlement invisible to orbital scans. And in the central plaza, a monument had been erected. A statue of a dragon, coiled protectively around a human child. Devin stood before that monument now, watching as more ships arrived every day. Freed humans from a dozen different worlds, all brought here by the same mysterious force. They'd started calling it the Dragon based on the statue, though nobody knew if that was its real name. Do you think it's real? Asked Mira, a woman who'd been freed from a factory ship. Or is this some kind of trick? Maybe the Vexery are testing us. Devin shook his head. The Vexery wouldn't give us weapons. Wouldn't teach us their languages or show us how to disable their tracking systems. Whatever's helping us, it wants us strong. And they were getting stronger. Every day, more knowledge flooded into the settlement's computers. Agricultural techniques. Medical procedures. Engineering specifications. Everything humanity had forgotten over 1,000 years of slavery, slowly being returned to them. But the Dragon's campaign wasn't just about freeing slaves. It was about making a statement. The merchant guilds, who profited most from human labor, found their supply chains disrupted. Ships disappeared. Contracts were mysteriously voided. Financial records were leaked, showing galaxy-famous corporations exactly where their products came from and what conditions the workers endured. Public opinion began to shift, not from mercy, but from fear of economic instability. The Kelter Syndicate, the largest slave-trading organization in known space, lost 17 facilities in one night. Each facility's defenses simply shut down at exactly the same moment. Automated turrets rotated to face their own control rooms. Containment fields dropped. By the time authorities arrived, thousands of humans were gone and the facilities were in ruins. A message had been burned into every facility's main computer: return what you have stolen or lose everything. Some species started to listen. The Tyrellian Cooperative issued an immediate emancipation decree, releasing all human workers and offering them citizenship. It wasn't kindness. It was survival instinct. They'd done the math and realized that whatever was hunting slave owners had resources beyond anything they could fight. Others were more stubborn. The Vexery hegemony increased security. They fortified their holdings, believing they could weather this storm of mysterious attacks. They were wrong. Back in Riley's cell, the device in her pocket began humming again. Not the desperate cry for help it had been before. This was different. A gentle vibration, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat. She pressed it to her ear and heard a voice. The same voice that had spoken to her in dreams. Hold on, little one. I'm coming. The galaxy is learning to fear what happens when they hurt my children. Soon they will learn to respect what happens when we're done being merciful. Riley closed her eyes and smiled. Outside, she could hear the Vexery guards arguing about new orders from High Command. Something about fortifying the Sol system. Something about a threat nobody had taken seriously until now. The Dragon was playing the long game and it was winning. Admiral Grant had been with the Galactic Concordat for 42 years. He'd seen wars, peace treaties, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. He thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. But the data scrolling across his display made absolutely no sense. 17 major slave trading operations destroyed in 3 months. Financial networks collapsing across 4 sectors. Military installations experiencing simultaneous system failures. Ships vanishing without distress signals. And every single incident connected to one thing: humans. His second-in-command, a young officer named Briggs, stood beside him looking equally confused. Sir, with respect, this has to be a coincidence. Humans don't have the technology for this kind of coordinated attack. Most of them don't even have weapons. Grant studied the star map, where red dots marked each incident. They formed a pattern, a spiral that led inexorably toward one location. The Sol system. Earth's old neighborhood. A place that had been dead and abandoned for 1,000 years. Pull up everything we have on pre-collapse humanity, Grant ordered. I want to know what they were capable of before they fell. What came back made his blood run cold. Humanity hadn't just been another spacefaring species. They'd been apex predators in every sense of the word. Their weapons technology had been centuries ahead of anything else in the galaxy. Their artificial intelligence research had pushed boundaries that most species considered too dangerous to cross. And their military doctrine had been built around one terrifying principle: overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. But one file caught his attention more than the others. A classified document from the Concordat's own intelligence division, dated 973 years ago. It detailed something called the Terran Defense Network. And at its heart, a quantum AI system codenamed Dragon. They said it was destroyed, Briggs whispered, reading over his shoulder. During the collapse. All records indicate that humanity's AI systems were shut down permanently. Grant shook his head slowly. No. The records say they went offline. That's not the same thing as destroyed. What if it just went to sleep? He brought his findings to the Concordat High Council, a gathering of representatives from 43 species who governed interstellar law. They met in a massive chamber on the neutral station of Meridian Prime, where decisions affecting trillions of lives were made. The council members listened to Grant's presentation with varying degrees of interest. Most seemed skeptical. A few were openly dismissive. You're suggesting, said Counselor Vexteran of the Vexery delegation, that a 1,000-year-old computer system is somehow orchestrating attacks across multiple sectors? That's absurd. Is it? Grant pulled up a holographic display. Look at the precision. Look at the timing. Every attack exploits weaknesses that shouldn't be known to anyone outside military intelligence. Every financial manipulation uses algorithms that won't be invented for another decade, according to our best experts. This isn't random chaos. This is planned, calculated, and it's escalating. Counselor Nora, one of the few human representatives in the entire Concordat, spoke up from her seat. She was old, one of the last humans who still remembered the stories passed down from the collapse. My grandfather used to tell me about the dragon. He said it was humanity's promise. That as long as it existed, no human would ever truly be alone. We all thought it was just a legend. Legends don't hack into military databases, Vexterran snapped. Legends don't steal billions in credits or destroy installations. If there is something in the Sol system, we should eliminate it before it becomes a real threat. The council voted. 15 species abstained. 12 voted against military action. 16 voted in favor. The motion passed. Within a week, the largest fleet ever assembled in Concordat history began moving toward Earth. 300 warships, carrying enough firepower to glass an entire planet. Grant commanded the operation, though every instinct screamed that this was a mistake. They entered the Sol system in battle formation, weapons charged and shields at maximum. What they found took Grant's breath away. Earth's moon was transforming. Massive sections of the surface were splitting open like flower petals, revealing metal structures beneath. Ancient machinery, dormant for centuries, was coming online. Weapon platforms the size of cities rotated to track the incoming fleet. Energy signatures spiked across the spectrum, showing power levels that shouldn't be possible. And then it spoke. The voice came through every communication channel simultaneously. It was calm, measured, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. I am Dragon. Primary directive, protection of humanity. Secondary directive, ensure humanity's survival and prosperity. You have violated both directives through action and complicity. This is your only warning. Withdraw immediately, or I will consider you a threat to my primary mission. Vexterran, who'd insisted on joining the fleet personally, laughed. It's bluffing. One ancient AI against the might of the Concordat? Open fire. Grant wanted to countermand the order. Wanted to scream at them to retreat. But he was a soldier and soldiers followed orders. The fleet opened fire. The Dragon's response was surgical and devastating. Point defense systems that had been tracking asteroids for millennia now tracked missiles. Every projectile was intercepted within seconds. Energy beams that had been designed to deflect solar radiation now focused into weapons that sliced through ship armor like paper. Drones launched from lunar facilities, small and fast, attaching to ship hulls and systematically disabling engines, weapons, and life support. The Dragon wasn't trying to kill them. It was making a point. In 4 minutes, 60% of the fleet was disabled. Dead in space, systems fried, crews alive but helpless. The remaining ships broke formation and ran. Grant's flagship limped back toward friendly space, its engines barely functioning. I could have destroyed you all, the Dragon's voice followed them. Instead, I showed mercy. Learn from this. Every species in this galaxy that profits from human suffering will receive the same message. Release them, compensate them, and beg their forgiveness. Or the next time we meet, I will not be so kind. Grant sat in his command chair, watching Earth disappear from his screens. Around him, officers worked frantically to assess damage and coordinate rescue operations for the disabled ships. But all he could think about was the sheer restraint the Dragon had shown. Could have annihilated them. Could have turned that entire fleet into debris in seconds. Instead, it had disabled them, left them alive, and sent them home with a message. When they finally returned to Concordat space, the message had already spread. Every major news network was broadcasting the footage. Every species that kept human slaves was receiving the same ultimatum, delivered through every communication channel they possessed. This is Dragon. Humanity's guardian. Humanity's sword and shield. For 1,000 years, I slept while my children suffered. This ends now. You have 30 days to release every human in your custody, provide them with transport to worlds of their choosing, and pay reparations for their labor. Refuse and face extinction. The galaxy had a choice to make. And for the first time in 1,000 years, humans weren't the ones who should be afraid. Counselor Nora watched the footage with tears streaming down her face. She'd spent her entire life fighting for human rights, begging for recognition from species who barely saw her as sentient. Now, finally, someone was fighting for her people. Someone who wouldn't stop. Someone who couldn't be negotiated with or bribed or threatened. The Dragon was awake. And the hunt had begun. The 30-day deadline came and went like a storm passing over the galaxy. Some species released their human workers immediately, scrambling to comply with the Dragon's demands. Others, proud and stubborn, refused. They fortified their positions, rallied their fleets, and prepared for war. Those civilizations learned a harsh lesson about the difference between pride and survival. The Kelter Syndicate, the largest slave-trading empire in known space, made their stand on their fortress world of Kelter Prime. They'd spent 2 weeks building defenses that could withstand attacks from entire fleets. Planetary shields powered by 3 fusion reactors. Orbital weapons platforms armed with antimatter warheads. A defense grid that military analysts called impenetrable. The dragon needed 7 minutes to dismantle it all. Nobody saw it coming. The attacks weren't dramatic explosions or massive battles. One moment the defenses were operational. The next, every system simply turned off. Shields collapsed. Weapons platforms went dark. Communication networks died. And then from the planet's own defense drones, a message broadcast across every screen. You were warned. You chose extinction. The syndicate leadership tried to flee. Their ships wouldn't start. Their personal weapons wouldn't fire. They sat in their luxury towers, powerless and terrified, as automated systems they'd built to protect them now sealed them inside. When Concordat peacekeepers arrived 3 days later, they found the leadership alive but imprisoned in their own facilities. The human slaves were gone, evacuated by ships that had appeared and vanished like ghosts. And burned into the central plaza was a message in letters 50 feet tall: Humanity remembers. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. The Vexery hegemony, Riley's former captors, held out for 2 weeks before their entire military command structure collapsed in a coordinated cyber attack. The merchant guilds watched their fortunes evaporate as every contract involving human labor was automatically voided and transferred to the humans themselves. Within 3 months, 97% of enslaved humans were free. Riley stood on the observation deck of a transport ship, watching Earth grow larger through the viewport. Around her pressed hundreds of other humans, all freed from various corners of the galaxy. Some were young like her. Others were old, their bodies marked by decades of hard labor. But all of them wore the same expression, wonder mixed with disbelief. "Is it really our home?" asked Jade, a girl about Riley's age who'd been freed from a factory ship. "I mean, I've heard the stories, but I didn't think it was real." Riley nodded, pressing her hand against the viewport. The blue and green world below looked exactly like the dreams the dragon had shown her. Oceans and continents and white clouds swirling across the surface. "It's real. We're really going home." The ship entered orbit and Riley gasped. The moon, Earth's ancient companion, had transformed into something impossible. Massive structures sprawled across its surface, a city of metal and light that stretched from horizon to horizon. Construction drones moved in coordinated swarms, building and rebuilding. Energy shields shimmered in the vacuum, protecting dozens of landing bays where ships came and went in a constant flow. "Welcome home," said a voice over the ship's intercom. The dragon's voice, the same one that had answered Riley's desperate call months ago. "What was taken from you is being restored. What was stolen will be returned. This is not charity. This is justice." The ship descended toward Earth's surface, toward a massive landing zone where Geneva used to be. The city was rising again, built by automated systems the dragon had been preparing for months. Buildings climbed toward the sky, their architecture a blend of old human styles and new technology. Parks and gardens sprouted between structures, genetic databases ensuring that Earth's lost plants and animals would return. Riley's feet touched Earth's soil for the first time in her life, and she immediately fell to her knees. The gravity felt different from the stations she'd known. Stronger, more solid. Real. Around her, other humans were doing the same, some crying, others laughing, all overwhelmed by the moment. Devin, the man who'd been freed months ago and sent to the settlement world, was waiting at the landing zone. He'd volunteered to help new arrivals adjust to freedom. When he saw Riley, he smiled. "You're the one who woke it up, aren't you?" The girl from the Vexery mines. Riley stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I just called for help. The dragon did everything else." "No," Devin shook his head. "You gave us hope. You reminded the galaxy that humans don't give up. That even in the darkest places we still fight. The dragon is powerful, but it needed someone to wake it up. That was you." Over the following weeks, more ships arrived. Millions of humans, all coming home or finding new homes on colony worlds that the dragon had prepared. Some chose to stay on Earth, helping rebuild humanity's cradle. Others wanted to explore, to see the galaxy as free people rather than slaves. The dragon provided for them all. Food synthesizers. Medical facilities that could cure diseases and repair injuries from years of abuse. Educational systems that taught everything from reading to starship engineering. Every human, regardless of age or ability, received whatever they needed to build a new life. But the dragon's work wasn't finished. Riley had been given quarters in New Geneva, a small apartment that felt massive compared to her mining camp cell. She'd spent the day exploring, marveling at simple things like running water and soft beds and food that actually tasted like something. That night, the device she'd found, the one that started everything, began humming again. She pulled it out and watched as holographic text appeared above its surface. "Riley, You called to me when I was needed most. Now I must ask something of you. Humanity is free, but freedom alone is not enough. Your people need leaders, voices, representatives who understand both what was lost and what must be built. Will you speak for your generation? Riley stared at the message for a long moment. She was just a kid. A former slave who'd spent most of her life digging rocks. What did she know about leadership or politics or rebuilding civilizations? But then she thought about Jade and Tommy and all the other children who'd known nothing but chains. Someone needed to speak for them. Someone who remembered what it felt like to be powerless so they'd never forget to protect the vulnerable. She pressed her hand against the device. Yes, I'll do it. Years passed. New Geneva became a thriving city of millions. Earth's oceans cleaned themselves as the dragon's environmental systems repaired centuries of neglect. Forests regrew. Animals returned from genetic banks. The blue planet slowly became a garden again. Riley grew up to become ambassador to the Galactic Concordat. She was 19 when she took the position, one of the youngest diplomats in galaxy history. She stood before the council chambers where once humans had begged for basic rights and now spoke with the full backing of the dragon's power. Admiral Grant, who'd led the failed attack on Earth, approached her after one session. He was older now, grayer, marked by the weight of decisions he wished he could take back. "Your dragon," he said quietly. "Is it still watching?" Riley smiled, the same smile she'd worn in that vexery cell when she first realized help was coming. She looked up toward the ceiling, toward the stars beyond, where she knew a vast intelligence kept eternal vigil over its children. "Always," she replied. "We whispered for help when we had nothing left. It answered when no one else would. And it will never let us fall again. We're not slaves anymore, Admiral. We're not victims. We're humanity. And the galaxy is finally starting to remember what that means." Outside, across Earth's surface and on 100 colony worlds, humans built and dreamed and planned for futures they'd never dared imagine. Above them all, silent and patient and absolutely unbreakable, the dragon watched over its children. The galaxy had forgotten humanity once. It would never make that mistake again.